So the world of app mobile design, website design, blogs, graphics design is changing. Technology is allowing us to work more efficiently and use several powerful tools. One of the tools is called Figma. Welcome to this course on Figma Introduction for UI Designers. My name is Syed and I'll be the instructor for this course. I've been in the training industry for a little over 20 years and I'm teaching a little over 140,000 happy students on the Udemy platform. Let me tell you about the course agenda. In this Figma introductory course, I'm going to walk you through step by step, giving you real marketable skills and valuable skills, demonstrate how all of the tools work, how to create an effective design, what does a good splash screen look like. So I'm going to walk you from the frame tool, from the constraints, from components, and all of these terms that you'll actually see in action. This is our hands-on course. So all of my courses, in fact, are hands-on because I enjoy having students learn real world by working with various projects, which means I've included several projects. So in this course, I'm going to demonstrate how to create and design your actual blog or website, and of course, several other app designs using iOS app design and Android app design. I'm also going to cover certain design principles because that's important, especially if you're a beginner. So who's this course for? If you're a beginner and wanted to learn graphics design, mobile app design, you're in the right place. If you're an entrepreneur or a freelancer, that's even better. You can learn some valuable skills and transfer them to your clients and earn some money. If you're a web developer, that's even great because now you will not only learn, you already know the actual web development, right, such as PHP or any programming language that you use, but also you will understand how the app design elements also work and how do they fit in. And using Figma, it allows you to integrate your CSS code, for example, or your development code with your app design. And I'm going to demonstrate that in this course. So the way I've designed this course is sort of like a blended or flipped classroom. So in the beginning lectures, I'm going to jump directly into Figma and start demonstrating hands-on about this tool, functionality, and concepts as well. Towards the end of the course, in subsequent lectures, you will take a look at various concepts or conceptual lectures such as design principles, effective design, and so on. So I'm not going to bore you from the very beginning of boring lectures, right? So I'm going to just demonstrate directly the actual tool, have you learn it, and then take a look at the concepts after you actually work with something. And that's the best way I've seen, along with my students, learn the best way. So what are you waiting for? Jump right in, enroll now, and I will see you in class. Welcome back. In this lesson, I'm going to demonstrate how to go about actually logging into your Figma account and then understanding the overall Figma functionality and the tool itself. So I'm going to go ahead and simply click on sign in because I already have an account. So I'm going to click on sign in, asks for the email. So enter the email address and of course the password. So once I'm signed in, notice it is a cloud-based tool, right? So I still get my URL and it takes me to my dashboard. I can see various projects that I've been working on, okay? So before I start explaining the actual UI, as a homework, quick, open up a Figma account, right? Sign up and then make sure you end up in this screen. So once I'm logged on to Figma, notice on the left, starting from the top left, I have the three lines, right? This is our menu. So I can create a new file, I can import a file, I can get a desktop app. So this is very helpful. So here you have a platform that you can work directly in your web browser, but you could also download the desktop app. I've already downloaded the desktop app. So as a practice and homework, I'd like you to actually click on this link and follow through the process. And of course, if you have any questions, just post in the discussion area. I'll be more than happy to help. It's a fairly straightforward process. So I'm going to leave that as a homework for you so you can practice downloading the desktop app. And there are, of course, other menu items as well. I'm going to come back to this desktop app after I explain the user interface. I will demonstrate what that looks like. All right, so besides the menu, you have the plus sign, which is a new file, which is a shortcut. Okay. And then of course you have the import file. So both of these functionalities are also on the toolbar. On the left navigation pane, I have the search. I can search for any of these projects here. I have the drafts or the deleted files. And once again, the ClayDesk team project, where we can collaborate with other team members. So if you're working on a project, for example, a design project for an app, you can have multiple team members work on the same project. And the real benefit of Figma is that you can have even developers take a look at the design project as well. So let me go back. So on the left navigation, once again, fairly straightforward, right? So not a whole lot going here. On the center, you have the area where you can actually see all of your projects. For example, if I click on recent, I can click on any of these projects. So if I were to open one just so that you can actually see what it looks like, right, at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the ClayDesk project, and it opens up the actual canvas as well. And once you open a certain project or your file, notice the toolbar changes, right? So it appears to have more tools than before. So here I've created 2 screens already, so you can click on and select each screens and elements on those screens, screen buttons, and so on. So starting on the top here on my toolbar, notice the first tool I have is the move tool or the scale tool, and the shortcut on the keyboard is K or V. So depending on, once you become comfortable using Figma, you'll most likely use these shortcut keys as well. But for right now, we'll take a look at the move tool and the scale tool, right? Fairly straightforward. Scale means you can scale objects. The next tool is the frame tool and the slice tool, and I'll demonstrate each of these tools in subsequent lectures. But just for right now, we're looking at the objective here is to understand and take a look at the interface as well, what it looks like, what tools are available. So the frame and slice tools are part of this menu. Then we have the rectangle or objects tool. You can draw several objects. You can also import an image or place an image on the screen. Then we have our pen tool or the pencil tool. Of course, our text box is next. And then this is our comments. So you can place comments within your project so that when you collaborate with other team members, they can actually view your comments as well. And in the center here is the name. You can give it any name. For example, it's called ClayDesk here, but you can choose to provide any other name that you wish for this particular project. And of course, the username is here. A couple of usernames because I have the desktop version open. I'm going to demonstrate that shortly as well. You can share this project. So if I click on share, for example, it brings up a dialog box. Fairly straightforward. You can simply invite your team members, or you can copy a link, create a link, and then email the link as well. So right next to share, I have the present. So once you're done with the design, app design interface, you can actually present it, and you can view the settings. And here's your zoom, and this is your export tools as well. So for example, if you need to export this into, let's say, InVision. All right, so this is our toolbar, fairly straightforward. On the right side, notice you have the design, prototype, and code, 3 various sections or tabs within the right side. The first one is the design tab. So for example, right now, notice one of my screens is selected on the canvas, and it's called iPhone XS. I can change it to different versions of the phone that I'm designing this app for, such as Galaxy 8, iPhone SE, iPad, and so on, or the desktop version as well. So it depends. So in this sample project, I've used the iPhone X as the screen. Once you select this, it gives you the dimensions, the X, W, and the Y as well, or the angles as well, all right? So X, Y, the width, height, and of course the angles of rotation. The background of this, since I already have an image background, by default it's the white background. The instance is iPhone X. Layout grid, I'll explain all of these, so not to worry. Just kind of go through this and glimpse what these all mean, right? So what is a layout grid? Just understand and remember these terms at this point. I'll demonstrate each of these in subsequent lectures so you'll understand and also apply and take a look at how they work. So we have the fill, stroke, effects, and of course the export as well. So any object that you select, notice it'll give you the properties of all of these objects. Okay, great. The prototype, of course, If I select back my entire screen for iPhone X, the destination is either iPhone 10 or star, or depending on the objects that I have on this particular screen. And notice as soon as I hover over each one of these, if you notice on the left side of the screen, it also hovers of different objects, right? So these are basically my objects that I can select. And as far as code is concerned, let me select the object here, click on code. Notice it gives me the CSS code, which is the cascading style sheets. So this, the developer or the programmer or the coder can use to actually code using these CSS style sheets. So a very powerful element here. This gives you an idea of what the interface looks like. This is again the cloud version, right? The center tools that are displayed once I select the screen, right? So if I select any one of these, because these are just duplicates or mirrored, notice a few additional tools appear. So one of them is of course crop image. The other one is Boolean groups. I can either do union groups or intersection groups, and I'll talk about what those are later on. But you can do subtract, intersect, exclude, and so on. The next tool is use as a mask. So I can use various masks and layers. Some of you are familiar with these terms. If not, I'll talk about those. And components. This is one of the most powerful tools that I've come across using Figma, is creating components. Before I actually dive deeper into components in subsequent lectures, for now, component is simply, let's say you create an object on one screen, the same object is created on other screens. Okay, so the behavior and functionality of those objects can be changed altogether at once. So you don't have to actually go and select different objects at different times and change the properties. If I change a property of one object, it changes the properties of all the rest of the objects. That's called components. We'll take a look at what that is. And of course, instances are just part of components. So if I create a component, there are multiple instances within the component, and I can edit the object as well. So if I click on, let's say, the getting started, click on edit object, I can simply edit objects and so on. And notice both of these objects change on both screens because this is part of the component. All right, great. So this gives you a flavor of what the interface tool looks like for Figma. Next, let me show you the desktop version. Remember your homework? So I'm going to show you the desktop version. It's much easier to work within desktop version, and I'm going to show you the subtle difference as well between the online version of Figma and the desktop. So let me go ahead and switch to my desktop app. Okay, let me go ahead and click on the desktop app. And this is what it looks like. So once you download, install, and open it, notice this is what it is going to look like. Very similar to the actual cloud version. And the good thing about this is everything is synced. So whatever you change using your browser online automatically changes in the desktop app. So once I have the desktop app open, I can click on the same project called ClayDesk. And notice it brings me to a similar screen, exactly the same screen rather. The only difference here is up on the menu, there's an additional menu on top. So here you can actually use this menu to select these options. You could of course also use the same menu here, which is the same menu, right? So the text menu here is the same text menu up on top. There we go. Okay, so depends on how you wish to work. Sometimes your internet connection is slow, so you may want to use the desktop version when you design these apps. So in this lesson, let's recap. I just wanted to give you a flavor or introduction to the Figma interface, what it looks like. And with this kind of practice, I've assigned a homework for you. You have to download the desktop app, open it up, so you can practice with this particular lecture. So with this, let's move to the next lesson. So welcome to this lesson on Introduction to Wireframes. So far, we've talked about the principles of design. We understand the difference between interactive and interaction design. Here I'm going to talk about what wireframes are. So this is where we actually start implementing some of the concepts that we've learned so far. So recall, the interaction design is not about how the interface responds to a user, but it's about the behavior of the person. Okay, so it's not the behavior of the interface, it's how people behave when they get to a certain website or work with your product, and so on. So here I'm going to talk about what wireframes are and what are some of the options that are available to us that allows us, or the tools that are available to us that allow us to create these wireframes. So what do? Are you a web developer? Are you a programmer? Are you a graphics designer? Or maybe a product manager or a marketing manager? Anything that you create or work with, wireframes are very beneficial. So before you even start doing something, right, or making an action to create a website. So for example, if you're creating a website using WordPress, you just don't download WordPress and then use some of the options in WordPress. It's always a good idea to actually sketch your work before you begin. So no matter which industry do you belong to, what you do, as long as you are creating something, you're working with a product, right, you can apply these wireframes techniques that I'm going to talk about in this lesson and subsequent lessons as well. So what is a wireframe? Remember, I mentioned earlier in one of my earlier lessons that when a construction, right, a house construction for example, or a construction of a building, you hire an architect, and that architect is responsible for creating actual frame of the building before you can actually use mortar and so on, right? So before the building is even constructed, plans are laid out. I've yet to come across a building that does not have a blueprint or an architectural plan. Then why is it that when we create websites, we don't necessarily use any of these architectural plans? Okay, I know when I started off a long time back, I just used to create these websites. Of course, you get a lot of experience over time and you understand where to place various elements. You understand the interactivity of your website. You understand the behavior. But very little thought is placed into a person who comes to your site. How is that person going to behave? And how well is your site designed as far as the interaction elements are concerned? So just like an architect of a building is required by law, think of that as being a requirement when you create a website, for example, or if you're thinking of creating a new product, how is that product going to function, and so on. So the idea of wireframes basically comes from 3D modeling as well. So not just the architectural end of things, but also from 3D modeling. So for example, when the graphics designer or an illustrator, the person creates a model, basically a wireframe is created first. That's how you see all these animated characters, by the way, in movies and videos. All these characters have a wireframe behind the scene, and then everything else comes after. So wireframes are essential because they tell you where the hands go, where the legs go, what kind of shape do we want, and different points in the model. So the same concept applies to our web development or website development. So the basic definition of a wireframe, according to Wikipedia, for example, is just a website wireframe is a visual guide that represents the skeletal framework of a website. Pretty straightforward. Another definition is wireframing is a low-cost, rapid, iterative design. And I want to focus on this word iterative, right? Because you keep going in a loop, right? You keep doing it, you keep doing it. You add additional things and you remove some of the elements from your design and so on. So it's a low-cost, rapid, iterative design technique that offers one of the best methods for gaining design insight early. Remember, it's always good to plan before you actually start creating an action and start your work. So different qualities of wireframes are out there. Remember the old manual days where you'd have those sticky notes and you just kind of jot down your thoughts on a chart paper or on a board. You would pin those. That's one way of creating a wireframe, just logical steps as to which element will be placed, and when a user comes to the site, how will that user behave? So based on that fundamental concept of interaction design, you would end up creating a site or maybe a home page or a couple of other pages and so on. You can use the manual method, or you can use software tools that allow you to create wireframes. And here I'm going to mention 3 different tools in the next lesson as to creating a wireframe. So whether you're doing it manually or using one of the tools is perfectly fine. Obviously, using online tools or using software to create wireframes is better. Okay, so we'll take a look at that in the next lesson as well. So just a brief lesson on the concept of what a wireframe is, what does it do, and why do we need it. So with this, let's move to the next lesson. In this brief lesson, I'm going to talk about the basic principles of interaction design. So before I talk about the actual principles of design, we talked about the various characteristics of interaction design in the previous lesson. And we know that interaction design is in fact coming from the user's perspective, not so much of the interactive elements that you place on the website or within your product. It's in fact the usability from the user's perspective, how the user feels about the fact that while browsing your website, how much time does the user spend? What are the conversion rates of the user? And that's what essentially implies when we talk about the interaction design. So let's take a look at some of the basic 5 principles of design first. The first principle is balance. Then we have proximity. Alignment is the third principle. 4th is repetition, and then 5th is contrast. We'll take a look at each one of these and see what we mean by various principles, because these are important as you develop your skills to become an interaction designer. You ought to know these in the back of your mind. So let's take a look at what balance is next. So balance in design is similar to, let's say, balance in physics, right? So if you were to place a button on the top, then the next button would probably be on the bottom or onto either side. So depending upon your own requirement, the distance has to be the same among items, right? Same thing with the boxes. So if one box is 250 pixels by 250 pixels, then the other box should follow the same logic. The larger shape close to the center can be balanced by a small shape close to the edge. The balance provides not only stability, but a good structure to your design. And essentially, it is the weight distributed in the design by the placement of your elements, right? So if you have a web page, for instance, whether it's for your desktop or you're designing it for a mobile device or for a tab, doesn't really matter. It has to balance your elements on the screen. They must balance each other out. So in other words, no one single element should be the odd one out. It should be pleasing to the eye, where when you're looking at a website, all of the elements placed on the site must be coherent. Then comes proximity. Proximity literally means closeness, right? So it creates a relationship between elements. So for example, it provides a focal point. It does not mean that elements have to be placed together, by the way, even though the word proximity implies closeness, but not necessarily in the world of interaction design or the principles of design. Elements should be visually connected in some way. So for example, if I have a box, then there's some text that follows that box. Notice a good example would be your business card, right? So if on a business card you have a logo and then you have some text, and that has an interrelationship, right? It seems synonymous. So proximity is important as far as the principles of designs are concerned. Alignment, equally important, allows us to create order and organization on our site. So for example, if you were to align elements, this would allow them to create a visual connection with each other. So an example would be like dividers on your web page. So you can have, let's say, boxes that divide and place these lines to create sections on a single page. And they must be aligned equally, right? So in other words, as the user scrolls down a page, notice everything stays the same. And then we have a repetition. It simply strengthens a design by tying together individual elements. So no matter which page you go to, you see the same concept, right? So if you go to the About Us page or the Services page or the Contact Us page, things are repeating, right? So the boxes are repeating, the elements are repeating themselves, the proximity is the same, the balance is maintained. So repetition also helps to create association and consistency, and it helps in branding your website as well. And repetition can create a rhythm, a feeling of organized movement, and this sticks to your mind. So even if you were to go away from the website, in one form or the other, these pages will stick to your mind because they're being repeated, right, from one page to the other. So if you buy a product, you go to the next page where you add your products to the shopping cart, and then you go to the next page, which again, all of these are similar. So it creates a nice branding perspective, or gives a branding perspective to your site. And then we have our contrast, right? It's just the juxtaposition of opposing elements. And these are helpful when we talk about the principles of design. The opposite colors on the color wheel, for example, or value, light, dark, or direction. It could be any one of these options. Contrast allows us to emphasize or highlight key elements in your design. So when we looked at the ClayDesk.com site, notice the background was white with light gray, but there were red buttons placed. So let's get started. These principles of design have been actually implemented on ClayDesk.com. So next, let me in fact show you what do we mean by balance, proximity, and so on by visiting our site. So here we are on ClayDesk.com, and notice we talk about balance, right? So things seem to balance. Then we talked about proximity. We talked about repetition. We talked about contrast. So all of these, in one form or the other, are found on this site because that's how we tried to implement the principles of design when we created this site. Even though it seems pretty basic, right? You see some interactive elements. Now these are interactive, remember? This is not interaction. But when we talk about contrast, for example, notice how these learn more, enroll now, and free download, and these red color sort of like contrast with the background, so your eye catches these right away as soon as the landing page appears. And the proximity is simply this icon. Cloud computing relates to the learn more button on the bottom. The e-learning icon relates to the enroll now, and so on. And then of course the balance, because all of these four services are balanced on this page. So this way seems fundamental but very important. So practice with these principles of design next time when you create a site, whether it's in WordPress or you're a programmer or a developer. Getting the skills of interaction design is always helpful. So hope this helps, and let's move to the next lesson. Welcome back. In this lesson, I'm going to talk about the wireframe management. I'm going to provide several tips and techniques in this lesson that allows you to effectively manage your wireframe design. So first is the box. In other words, this is the minimal visual building block of a wireframe, and it's called the box, right? Think of this as a container. If you're familiar with, let's say, Bootstrap framework, it serves the same purpose. Okay, so everything happens in the box, whether this box is for the desktop, whether this is for the mobile device layout that you're creating, whether it's iOS or Android or your tab, could be anything, right? But the minimal visual building block of a wireframe is the box. So boxes usually contain a uniform kind of content, right? Not the individual elements. It's important, however, to choose the right level of breakdown to support the discussion. So as you create your story, right? As you create your theme, as you're building your layout, as you're creating this nice looking wireframe, so you use these boxes. So think of the layout design as boxes, right? So think in terms of boxes. You stack these boxes and you create a certain environment, right? Whether you want to create a tower or a flat design. So it just depends. So important thing here is to make sure that you have uniform kind of content. So here's a visual illustration of what you may encounter or you create these boxes. So this can be vertical, this can be horizontal, the width and height, and so forth. So it depends on your own requirement as to what it is that you're creating. So for example, if you were to take a look at Twitter wireframe boxes, right? So if you navigate to twitter.com, evaluate their site, their landing page, and other pages, you'll notice the box framework. Okay, so I'll leave that to you as an exercise, by the way, to go out there, explore the Twitter site and other sites as well, and keep thinking in terms of boxes. Evaluate the theme, the visual layout, how easy it is for the user, right? We're interested in the user behavior, not the interactive elements, but the interaction design. So here's an example of Twitter, for example, the way they have structured their layout, right? So they can have a theme where they can have 3 of the same boxes, for example, and within those large boxes you have smaller boxes with their own sizes and width. And recall the balance, the proximity, the contrast, all plays into part when you're creating your wireframe design. So these are helpful tips and techniques as to when you create your own website and place elements using ProtoShare, Balsamiq, or any other software tool. You ought to be able to memorize these tools and techniques, or tips and techniques. So try working with patterns as another tip, as much as possible to support memory and learning. Your wireframe can easily get out of control because your site is not just 1 page or 2 pages. There can be hundreds of pages, thousands of pages. So try working with patterns as much as possible to support memory and learning, making the interface trustworthy. So as a user, right, put yourself in the user shoes. What if I were to visit this website? What's going to happen? Am I finding it easy to use? If I purchase a product on this site, how easy it is to check out? Are the buttons large enough? Can I see them? And so forth. So it's just the behavior patterns. So practice, go online, take a look at, understand the concept of interaction design, and once you start visualizing these sites and navigating from one site to the other, take a look at what appeals you, and then post it in the discussion area. We'll love to have those discussions as we move forward. So just a brief lesson on some of the tips and techniques on wireframe management. So I hope this helps. Let's move to the next lesson. Welcome back. In this important lesson, I'm going to demonstrate, but before I actually do the demonstration of the difference between slice and frame tool, it's important to understand what these tools are, because this is a fundamental tool in any design class or lecture that you'll see or hear. So in Figma, we're going to take a look at what a slice tool is, a frame tool. So first, just the concept of what a slice does. So as the name suggests, it slices something, right? What does it slice? It slices the actual frame on your canvas, or the images on your canvas, or the area, to be more specific, right? So it allows you to specify a specific region of the screen to export. So you can export into PNG format or JPEG format and so on. And it also allows you, again, a specific region to export even if they're not organized into a single group. So you could have, let's say, 3 different elements on the canvas or 3 different frames on the canvas. You could slice them and then export them. We can simply just drag and drop or drag a slice around the region you want to export and add an export setting to the object. Slices also let you control the padding. Otherwise, the padding is computed from the overall shape bounds. So it's a powerful tool that you can actually use. Next, let's take a look at what a frame tool is. So essentially, frames are similar to slices, but frames typically contain and clip the child layers. They also can contain a background, they can have effects, various objects, and so on. We can simply add a frame to your canvas. So for instance, if you're designing an app and you like to create a frame for this particular app, you could do so. You can customize the frames. If you choose to use pre-existing frames such as iPhone 10, Galaxy S8, desktop, iPad mini, and so on, you could simply select those as well. And that'll give you a predefined or predetermined frame for the app that you're designing for a specific platform or the phone. Let's take a look at a demo of what slice and frames are, right? So let me jump right in, give you some hands-on application of how the frame tool works and how do we work with slice as well. So let me navigate to my Figma desktop. Great. Once I'm in the desktop version of Figma, I'm going to go ahead and simply click on the plus sign to create a new file, right? Because this is the previous file that we've been working with. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the plus sign here. This is going to actually create a new file and provide me with a blank canvas so that I can begin my work from scratch. So once again, I'm going to demonstrate the frame tool and give you some idea of the slice tool as well. There we go. Once I have a blank file created, I'm going to go navigate to my menu here, click on the region tools and select the frame tool. The keyboard shortcut is of course using the F key for the frame tool and S key for the slice tool. So I'm going to choose frame tool and then simply drag a frame on my canvas. Okay, pretty straightforward. As soon as I drag a frame, notice on the right side it gives me the frame dimensions. So the X, the Y's, the width and the heights, and the angle as well. I can drag the frame anywhere on the screen, on the canvas area. If I need to choose a predefined frame, for instance, I could do so. Let me show you that as well. So let's navigate to the frame tool. As soon as I click on the frame tools on the menu, notice on the right side it gives me the design tab. And from the design tab, I can pick and choose any device. So iPhone 10, 8 Plus, Galaxy 8, I can choose from tablets, desktop, watch. So I could design an app for an Apple Watch, which is 42mm or 38mm. Okay, so as designers, you can actually choose predefined frames as well. So I'm going to choose, for instance, phone. I'm going to select iPhone 10 because that's what I'm using. So I can simply click on this and it automatically inserts the frame for me. And notice the width and the heights are calculated automatically. So these are predefined, right? So I don't have to create from scratch. So now I have 2 frames. And once I have frames, I can simply add a background image to the frame. So select the frame, go back to my menu, click on the place image, brings up my Explorer. I can simply choose any image I wish to insert. So for example, I'm going to choose this bookkeeping image, click open, and notice I can either drop this image on the customized frame or on the iPhone 10 screen size. So it depends on your own choice. So just click on where you want this frame dropped, and notice it snaps to the actual frame of iPhone 10. So let me go ahead and double click on the image because I need to drag the image within the frame itself. I can also work on other properties of this image such as exposure, contrast, saturation, tint, and so on. Alright, so I'm going to get into this a little later, but right now I'm just talking about frames, right? So once, let's say you have the image on the frame itself, the image has a background, right? Notice the image itself is a little gray, whereas the background screen of your iPhone X canvas is white. Okay, so once I select the frame itself, for instance, I can change the background to match the background of the image itself. In order to do so, notice I first have to select the actual frame, navigate to this eyedropper, right? This is the tool that you want to use so that you can match objects together. So click on this tool and click on the gray area of the object, and notice now my iPhone XS and the image backgrounds are the same. Okay, so you can play with it. So as a practice task, go ahead, create a frame, and then insert an image, and then of course colorize it so it matches the same size. Okay, all right. So this gives you an idea what a frame is, right? Same thing with my customized frame. Let me go ahead and insert a quick object here as well. So here I'm going to choose, let's say, this object right here. And I'm going to do the same thing, just make it a little smaller. Perfect. So I have two objects and two frames, right? So this is all about frames. Next, let me show you how slice works. So go back to the same menu. Instead of frame tool, choose the slice tool, and notice on the right side it gives you the export option, right? So I can click on the plus sign next to export, and I can export as PNG, JPEG, or SVG files. So this allows you to actually do the export. The other way is I can simply select these or select the area that I want to export. Remember, slice tool allows you to export objects, right? So as soon as I select both of these, I can scroll down, click on export, and this allows me to export two layers. So powerful tools, the slice tool and the frame tools. So I can export both of these layers as PNG, JPEG, or SVG. Perfect. So go ahead and practice using the frame tool and the slice, but more importantly, concentrate on the frame tool, right? Because that's something that we'll be working with quite a bit. So I hope this helps. Let's move to the next lesson. Welcome back. Moving forward, in this lesson, I'm going to demonstrate the use of the pen tools, the pencil tool, and of course certain shapes as well using Figma desktop. You could do this Figma online or desktop, same thing, just whatever you're comfortable with. So I'm going to use Figma desktop, and here you see on your screen I already have some vector shapes drawn, right, using the pen tool. So let me in fact get rid of this. We're going to start from scratch, right? So I'm going to demonstrate how you can actually do it. So on our toolbar, notice there's a tool called Shapes tool and then the pen tool. So in this lesson I'm going to focus on these two tools. So once you practice on these, and I'm going to assign some homework as well, you get comfortable with this. So by the time we actually start with our app design, you should be pretty comfortable with all of these tools. And I'm going to demonstrate some shortcuts as well, so make sure you practice on that as well. Alright, so let's first begin some basic shapes. So within the shape tools, I can either draw a rectangle, line, arrow, ellipse, polygon, star, or I can insert an image as well. So fairly straightforward. So I'm going to run through this quickly. So rectangle tool, you can simply drag and drop a rectangle, whatever size you choose. You can specify the width, height, the x coordinates, y, and then the angles here as well. So notice if I hover over the tool or the actual rectangle, 4 dots appear in the corner, right? So this is the radius of this rectangle. In other words, well, it's not a circle yet, but what I could do is I could hold my mouse button down and round off the corners by dragging inwards. I can give a radius of 33 or whatever number I choose, and if you notice on the right side it says 34. So I could either specify a number here, let's say 31, and it will change the radius here. So for instance, if I need to create a button, right, for my app, I need to custom design my own buttons, or if it's a requirement from the customer, this is the way you would do it. So I would draw a rectangle shape, give it a radius, let's say about radius of 50, and then once I have the radius, I'm going to insert an image. So simply go up to your tool, place image. I'm going to select this background and create the image. Next, I want text, so I'm going to say click here. Again, this is just an example, right? So I'm quickly running through the rectangle tool and creating a button. So once I specify click here, maybe I want to make this a little smaller, and notice if I make this smaller, it does not adjust, right? So a shortcut and a quick tip is to hold the shift key down. That way you can maintain the proportion of the button, right? So if I don't hold the shift key down, notice I can even make the button vertical. But as soon as I hold the shift key button down, it reverts back to the actual place. So I'm going to make the size 230 by 92 and then click here. Same thing. I'm going to hold the shift key down and then center it. Perfect. Next, you can of course play with the rest of the areas like stroke and whatnot. So for example, with the text, I can change the font type to whichever you want. I could also do the bold or the pen stroke 24 and so on, right? So these are the areas that you can actually take a look at. Change the color and give it some effects. For example, a drop shadow for your text, or if you like a layer blur, inner shadow, background blur, you could do so as well. So you can play with these, and this is your homework for this. All right, so perfect. So this is how you would actually end up with a rectangle and then create a button by working with the radius. On the left navigation, notice within my layers, I have 2 layers. Well, the click here, text, and then the rectangle. What I could do is I could group these together so that they stick together. Otherwise, if I move the button, the text does not move, right? Let me do a Control Z. So in order to group these, fairly straightforward, just highlight the entire button. The shortcut is to right click and then group selection, or you can use your keyboard and do Control G to group, and this way it'll create a group for me. So I can call this button group by simply going up to my layer and renaming the layer as well. Okay, so some quick and handy things. So if I click on the arrow here, it uncollapses and shows me that there are 2 objects part of this group. Okay, so this is an excellent way where you can manage your app, because these layers can become hundreds and hundreds, right? It can reach up to hundreds of layers by the time you're done with your app, depending on the complexity of the app. So this is a good way to actually organize right from scratch. Perfect. Similarly, I would like you to actually explore other tools as well. So using the same concept, same shortcuts, you can insert line, arrow tool, and as a homework, this is what you're going to do. You're going to play with all of these tools, and if you have any questions, post in the discussion area. All right, perfect. So we move that aside. So let me next show you how the pen tool works. Very powerful tool. So on the toolbar, notice there's a pen tool. You can use a shortcut called P. So simply select the pen tool, and here I'm going to click once, and then click again, and then keep clicking to draw the actual shape. Okay, and then Figma is smart enough to understand that, hey, these lines join, so I'm going to continue to join these lines, and when I'm done, I can click done to have a square. If I'm not done, or if I want to continue, I can simply draw and keep drawing other lines as well. So that way I can continue to draw any kind of vector shapes as I like. So let me go ahead and complete this 3D box here. So all I'm doing is just simply clicking one endpoint and joining the other endpoints, right? So this kind of gives you the shape of whatever you want. Perfect. So this looks like a box, right? And then once I'm done, I can click on the done, or before I click on done, there's a tool called paint bucket. So if I need to fill this box with certain paint, I could do so. So I'm going to go ahead and start filling the shapes here with the color. So this fill color is in gray. Of course, I can change the color. If I need to maybe use the eyedropper here and choose the button color here, which is this particular pink area, or maybe the orangish type, I could do so. I could also change the stroke. So instead of the stroke color, I can change the color of the stroke, or I can change the weight of the stroke. So from 1 to 5, and it's going to actually change the stroke of the outline. I could also align it center, inside or out. So for instance, if I say inside, it's going to change the stroke inside. So once I have this, of course, I can select any of these endpoints and change the shape, right? So I can manipulate the vector shape any which way. And once I'm satisfied with this actual shape, I can click done, and now I have the actual image. I can also make it larger. So of course I can make the shape larger, right? And hold the shift key down. So if I hold the shift key down, it proportionates to my original drawing, right? Otherwise it's just going to keep the shape larger or smaller the way I want it. All right, so I'm going to hold the shift key down. Perfect. There we go. Double click or edit the object. I can recolor the shapes individually. So if I need to have this shape change color, I could do so. I could also, for instance, move the inner sides to any shape I want, and so on. So this gives you a good idea on working with these vector shapes. So I hope this helps kind of practice with these shapes. I've demonstrated the pen tool and the shapes as well. So make sure you get comfortable with the shortcuts and working with these shapes, because you'll be drawing them within the app as well. So practice, and let's move to the next lecture. Welcome back. Super excited. A very important lesson. In this lesson, I'm going to demonstrate how to work with components. So in Figma, components are very powerful. And once you master the art of actually working with components, your app design is just going to fly. And you will be designing and creating these apps basically, or designing these apps rather, in no time. So let me jump right in and demonstrate, show you the ins and outs of what components are and how do we actually use them. So by the time we actually start developing our first app, or so you can understand exactly how the components work. So I have this file open here. A couple of things already exist on the canvas that we've done in the previous lessons. So here I have this button that I created earlier. Okay, you can always create a new button or whatever. So for instance, this button right here says click here. Okay, fairly straightforward. We've done this before. So let me go ahead and in fact bring up my frame tool and go to my design tab, and I'm just going to place, for instance, let's say the Galaxy S8. Okay, so this frame is going to be now placed on my canvas area, and I'm simply going to drag the button on top of the Galaxy S8 frame while designing your app screen, right? So for instance, let's say we're just doing a basic getting started screen. That's your first screen in your app, or a splash screen and whatnot. Okay, but you get the idea. So let me in fact make it a little prettier by inserting an image. So that would kind of make sense, right, as we develop more and more apps. So let's choose this background, click open. Okay, make this smaller first, and simply create the background, bring to front so that my button stays in the front here. And I'm quickly also going to create a rectangle tool here for my menu bar, and just give it a quick color so we have a color to this. Okay, well, maybe I can change it to blue. Oh, that looks better. Perfect. So you get the idea. So I'm going to select my button and place it right here click here. So you get the idea, right? So I'm designing my first splash screen. I'm not going to do the whole thing because we are going to take a look at it in several lessons. But here, the important thing is working with components. So let me make it a little bigger so you can see. There we go. So once I have this button, okay, let's say I would like to design a new screen. Obviously, when users click on this button here, they will be navigated to the next screen within your app. So right now, this is just the first page of my app design. So let me get rid of this vector box here. We'll move it aside here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of these and just kind of move it on the side here so you'd actually see how components would work and what are components. So once you have this first page, for instance, and you have this button here, what happens when you create a new page? So let's say I like to duplicate my page here. So I'm going to select all of these layers, right? So you could select all of these layers by clicking on simply the Galaxy S8, or you can drag to select all of the objects on the screen. Either way, if you were to choose and select just the text, it will just select the text here. So it's easier that way also. So a couple of shortcuts here for you guys. So for instance, if I need to select all of it and just do a Control C and Control V, it's going to take it to my next screen. So now I have two screens. Let's do another one. So I have three screens. Okay, perfect. So here's the idea. You have these three screens on your app design, right? So it's your splash screen, maybe your home page, and then your products page or whatnot. So I have same buttons. I like to display the same buttons on all of the screens. Well, typically you would just edit this one button. For example, if I need to change the text of this button, let me zoom in a little bit here. Okay, there we go. So I have these three buttons. What happens when I change the text of this button? So I highlight the object here and simply navigate to my text and change the text to, let's say, regressed. This is the font type. So once I select this, notice it changes the font of the text on the first, but it doesn't really change on the other one. What if I have, let's say, 20 different screens on my app design? You know, it doesn't make sense for me to go to each screen and change the text or the object. So let me undo this. This is where components come into play. Very powerful tool. Okay, so now that I have, let me undo this. Perfect. So we follow the idea, right? So if I want to change something, anything on the screen, whether it's the text or the object itself or the color, whatnot, it should reflect on all of my other screens within my app design. And this is helpful because if I have, let's say, the whole menu created on the first splash screen because you want to show the menu on every single screen on your app, components will be helpful, and that's the way to go. So components are found on the top menu bar. It says create components. That's the Control-Alt-K shortcut key. So this is what is called the component, and this is how you're going to use it. So for example, if I need to change the text in all of these buttons on my app design, for example, so I'm going to go ahead and first select the entire button group because I want to duplicate the entire button as it is, and click on create component. So once I do that, it actually creates a component for my button here. And notice it's still the button group, right? Because I've grouped up on top for my button and text. So once the component is created, I'm going to go ahead and show you how it actually works. So to do that, let me first delete these because we don't have these. You're going to start off with actually creating a component. Then you're going to hold the Alt key down on your keyboard. Okay, so that's the Alt key on your keyboard. Make sure it's pressed, and you'll notice that your cursor changes into two arrows, right? So this is how you would simply drag to duplicate. So once you've duplicated this, let go. Do the same thing for the next screen. So very powerful. Okay, so this way you can actually copy objects and move objects so that they're part of the same component. So components again are very powerful when you actually start to work with them. Now what happens? Once you've created the component, first you create the component and then you copy these objects on all of your screens. Let's see if I change the text what happens. So I'm going to select my text here, and this time I'm going to change the type to read rest, and voila. Notice now you have all of your buttons reflect the same text. Okay, so this is what a component is, guys. Very powerful, very important. Same thing, you can do it with your menu. So you create a menu. Let's say you create the top menu, you create some text, you create some buttons, and all of those can be part of a component. And within each component, recall from one of our earlier lessons, are instances, right? So for example, this component, the button here, has a rectangle, right, with rounded edges, a background, and some text. So there's a couple of instances or 3 instances part of this component. So once you copy the component using the Alt key on your keyboard, it copies. So now if I change anything regarding this button, it is going to follow through with all of my components. So notice if I expand the square here, the button size, it automatically adjusts the button size for all of my other screens within my app design. Same thing with my text. If I need to increase the text, notice it increases the text. Very powerful. So as a homework, practice working with components and practice quite a bit with this. Very important. So I hope this helps, and let's move to the next lesson. Welcome back. Moving right along, in this lesson, another very important lecture, I'm going to demonstrate the concept and also apply that concept called constraints. So again, very important, very fundamental. If you can master this particular area within Figma, app design will be a breeze. Okay, so you should be able to create these apps in no time. And again, the concept here again is constraints. So it's very similar to components. Okay, so let's dive right in and let me show you what that is. So I'm going to go ahead first and open up a blank file or a new file, okay, by clicking on the plus sign here on the menu bar. Once I have the file open, I'm going to go ahead and click on my frame tool and select iPhone X, which brings me the blank frame on my canvas. I'm going to next go ahead and create our menu bar here. So just a rectangle, so to speak. Okay, that's all I'm doing. We've done this before, so you should be pretty comfortable with this. Let me zoom in. There we go. Okay, also change the color here quick. Perfect. So let's say you have this iPhone X frame, right? And you've created a first menu bar or a rectangle essentially with blue color. Let me show you what constraints are and where to find them. If I were to select my frame, notice on the design tab, I can of course change the properties, right? And we've been through it. If I were to select the rectangle, on the right side, I see an area that's called constraints. Okay, so I'm talking about this particular section. So what constraints are, essentially, think of them as the object on to the frame itself, like the iPhone XS, we have an object called a rectangle, right? A layer. It constrains itself to the actual frame. Okay, let me repeat that. So this rectangle here that we just drew is going to contain itself, constrain itself rather, to the actual frame of iPhone XS. What that means is if I were to, let's just select my frame here and expand the frame, notice on the right side my menu rectangle is not adjusted. Whereas on the left side, right, notice it is adjusted. And the reason is that because this is constrained to the left. That's my first property. It is also constrained to the top. So if I select the frame, notice it's constrained to the top, right? Okay. What happens, let me select the rectangle again. If I choose another option, but first let me close the frame here so adjust it back to its original size. There we go. Select the rectangle again so the constraints show up. The options that I have are right side, left and right, center, or scale. So the only important thing here for you to remember is the only option, scale, will be in percentage. The other options, left and right, and center, will be in sizes of pixels, 375 by 54. So if you choose a scale constraint, then you have to specify the percentages. That's the only difference. So you kind of remember that. But right now, let's take a look at the basic functionality of how constraints work. If I were to constrain this particular rectangle, right, the menu option, left and right, notice the 3 blue lines appear. So now I can select my frame here, and if I expand, notice my menu expands with it. Pretty cool. Okay, so now I can adjust the size, and my menu is not shortened. It actually increases along with the actual size of the iPhone X frame. And the reason is because I've constrained it on 3 sides, left and right, and on top. I can do top and bottom, so it's going to constrain all 4s. Okay, so I'm going to come back to the bottom later on. Right now I'm just going to show you the 3 sides, right? So it makes sense. Good. Let's move right along. So now I have both constraints, left and right. This is my right side, and then this is my left side. And of course I have the top 2. Perfect. Let's go down. Let's say we create another rectangle here, and this will be for our footer. Okay, and let's give it a color, maybe a different color. Perfect. So this particular rectangle in our footer area is, again, by default constrained to top and left. So once again, if I were to select this, let me in fact make it smaller so you can see the entire image, right? So if I were to increase, notice my footer does not increase because it is constrained only to left and top, right? Left and then top side. But if I were to constrain this footer to left and right, so now it should both work perfectly fine. Awesome. So you get the idea of how powerful these constraints are. Okay, so when designing your app, you need to kind of make sure you understand what these are. Otherwise you'll be adjusting each screen differently, and it'll be a nightmare eventually, because you'll have hundreds and hundreds of layers depending on the complexity of the app design. So just wanted to demonstrate how constraints work. So as a homework, you are going to go ahead and work with the bottom constraints as well, okay, or the center or other options. So that way you can practice working with these constraints. So I've shown you the basic idea, the concept, and also demonstrated the concept. Now you can kind of practice on these. And if you have any questions, feel free to post and discuss with other students and myself as well in the discussion area. So powerful tool, the constraints in Figma. Hope this helps. Practice, and let's move to the next lesson. Welcome back. Super excited to move to the next lesson. In this lesson, I'm going to demonstrate how to work with the grid system. So we understand a little bit about the Bootstrap grids, okay? Here, it's important to understand that before you actually design your app or your website, you need to understand the grid system and see how it actually applies before you start building or placing images or creating menu bars and other elements on the artboard or your canvas area. So what do I mean by grids? So let me go ahead and first demonstrate. So here's my first frame, which in fact is the center one here because that's the one selected. And then my next frame is the third one from the left, 1, 2, and 3. And then here's my first one. So my first one should be in order. And this is another quick tip and important. You need to be able to work in order, right? From left to right or top to bottom with the frames as well as objects within the frame. Okay, so keep that in mind if you want to be a good designer. A quick tip for you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the entire frame and the objects and just drag it to the top here. So I'm going to move this to the first, and then this is my second, and then my third, which is fine. Good. So I'm going to call this, let's say, screen 1, and this is another good practice. This is screen 2, and then I have my screen 3. Perfect. And as a homework quick, just go ahead and rename all of the objects as well in that order. So objects would be from left to right or top to bottom, either way. So just be organized. Perfect. So let me go ahead and select my screen 1 here. And notice on the right side under the design tab, I have the layout grid. Okay. So I'm going to click on the plus sign next to layout, and currently the grid is at 10 pixels. And notice the grid lines show. I can click on the grid, bring out the layout grid, and I have the options to either select columns and rows. So if I like to display columns on my artboard, notice by default it's 5 columns. I can increase the columns to, let's say, 12, and again I can have a maximum of 12 as per Bootstrap. Okay, so as soon as I enter 10 columns, it creates 10 columns for me. So it depends on your requirement and the app that you're designing or the website that you're designing. I can also increase or decrease the gutter. Gutter is the space between the columns, right? So if I say 10, you would notice that the space decreases between columns. The type is, of course, stretch, left or center. I'm going to keep it stretched so I can take a look at from both left side or the right side. It's equally spaced out. I can change the colors because if you're working with grid, that's one grid. You can add other grids as well. So for example, if I were to add another frame to it, and this is again getting into more intermediate and advanced, but it's good to know. So if you need to add another rectangle, for example, within this frame, you can work with grids separately from the main grid system. Okay, good. All right, so we understand what grids look like, right? And depending on your own requirement, you can adjust the grids accordingly. Similarly with rows, I have count of 10 rows with a gutter of 10 and so on. So here's the real benefit of using grids. And if you have not noticed already, you can, because my menu rectangle here and my footer rectangle here are different sizes. Okay, so the grids allow you to actually maintain these sizes and just kind of make sure visually what the sizes are of your elements on the screen and where to place those elements on the screen. And that's the power of using the grid in Figma. So for instance, let me in fact select the rectangle here on my screen 1. Notice the size is 416 by 54. Let me zoom in a little bit so you can actually see. There we go. And my footer is 416 by 60. Obviously there's a difference in size. Using grids, I can snap these rectangles to the grid itself. So notice it just kind of snaps it to it. So now the size of my footer is 416 by 72 pixels. And if I scroll up, I can similarly snap the top grid, which is 416 by 72. So a real benefit of using grids, in addition to, of course, using constraints and components that are demonstrated in earlier lectures. Very important. So now you notice that you have a perfect size menu with the same size of footer. Similarly, you could do the same for the rest of the screens. However, importantly, you want to be able to do this as components, right? And copy those screens to all of the rest of the screens. And that's the best practice. Otherwise, you'd have to go and manually change all of these screens, right? So I'm not going to go over through constraints because I've already done so. Refer back to my lecture on constraints as well as the components. That's important. So understanding grids is important. So let me bring up the grid menu again. Now I can add additional grids. Right now there's only one grid, right, to the screen. If I choose to, I can add another grid by clicking on the plus sign. Notice it brings me a second set of grid lines. And here I can specify maybe a column of 2. So that way, now my screen size on my artboard, the actual frame is split into 2 equal columns, right? So this is helpful if I need to, let's say, place an image, for example, on this side, right? So I can simply snap to this side of the grid and then create another rectangle and snap to the other one. Or better yet, while I'm doing this, I'm going to demonstrate the components. So the best way is to actually remove it from your actual frame and then create a component, right? So I'm going to select the actual rectangle, create a component, and once I've created a component, I'm going to bring it back into the canvas area or my artboard, hold my Alt key, and then duplicate it. Okay, that's the best practice, and that's what I was referring to, but I figured I'd just show it to you again. Perfect. So now I have 2 sets of rectangles, right? So here's my main component, that's my first one, and then here's a copy of it. So whatever happens to this part of the first component, of course, automatically is displayed on the other one. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and place these back onto my grid here. Perfect. And let me go ahead and change the color so it's easier for us to actually see. There we go. So that way it's easier to work with, right? So you understand the components, and of course I can work with constraints as well if I need to. I can snap, make sure it's left and right, so it's constrained to left and right, and same thing with this rectangle as well. There we go. So now if I were to select my screen and just kind of go left or right, notice it is responsive. Okay, so that way it's easier to work with using the grids. I can of course turn off the grids, so if I don't want to display the grids, I can just click on this eye and it just kind of hides the grids. And now my design is pretty good, intact, is very responsive. So that way it's important to understand the grid system when you're designing your app. So as a good practice, what I would do is start off with a blank canvas, right? Bring up the frame and then create these grids. So once you've created the grids, that gives you the structure, right? So a wireframe. And based on those grids, you can start inputting elements, objects, menu bar, buttons, and so on. So go ahead and practice with this as a homework. Create a new canvas, open up a new file, implement these grids, work with different column sets, revise the bootstrap functionality of the grids, the rules. And then with this, let's move to the next lesson. Welcome back. Moving right along. Super excited. I'm going to demonstrate in this lecture. In fact, we'll begin our first project. And this is going to be a real world project where we are actually going to create a blog or a website using Figma. During this creation, you will learn some additional tips and techniques, maybe learn some new tools, right, as I demonstrate this particular project. So I have a new file open. Let me go ahead and select the frame tool and select desktop. This will give me the desktop artboard on my canvas area. All right, so since I'm starting from scratch, a good practice is obviously you should have something on paper, right? So you need to have a well thought out design on paper. You need to know exactly where the menu goes, where the button goes, what kind of images need to be placed and whatnot. So you need to collect all of those thoughts on a piece of paper, design it, create a prototype, and then of course get to Figma and then get to work. So I'm going to leave that as a homework for you. So before you actually practice on this, take a piece of paper, design the actual website or blog that you think will work, right? Or maybe the customer, your customer has sent in a requirement, right? So the customer has sent in a potential design or the idea or the thought, and now it's in your hands to actually make it more creative and innovative at the same time. So with that said, I'm going to jump right in. I'm going to create, let's say, I'm going to place an image first. I'm going to put a logo up here, maybe just some text and some banner ads or whatever. Okay, so the idea is to create a blog, and the objective of this blog is going to be it's going to be a car blog, a vintage cars or any kind of cars. So we're going to talk about different kinds of cars. Before I do that, let me show you some existing blogs. So I'm going to go to the internet and just kind of show you the Google research blog. Again, notice the design is very simple. Just some section on top here, some text section, and there's a section of search blogs and maybe a couple of links and some social media. That's about it. So the Google blog is fairly straightforward. Another one is our ClayDesk e-discovery blog. This is also nice and simple. We have the top section, then of course our image and some text, and on the right side you'll see some widgets as well. The Microsoft blog has a couple of menu items on top, and then of course the left section is your text and the right is the widgets area or the more news area. So pretty much follows the same theme, right? Similarly, Apple has its own newsroom where you can actually take a look at that. This particular area has its own menu on top with some text, and then of course the images on the right and the text on the left. Simplicity is king, by the way. So as a design principle, you need to kind of make sure that you keep in mind the interaction design, right, of the user behavior. What will happen when the user actually visits these blogs. So let's go back to our Figma desktop version, and I'm going to go ahead and import and insert an image. So our logo goes in here. Let me see if I can find the right logo. I'm going to select this logo for a blog, and I'm going to call this ClayDesk car blog or something like that. Okay, you can give it any name you like. So once I have my image here, notice it has some additional text too, right? So I would only like to actually see this part, the actual image, so not the learning on demand and whatnot. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how to crop images. So make sure your image is selected, and then to crop image, I just need to go to the fill option, fit, crop, or tile. So I'm going to choose crop, and notice it places these placeholders, and I can simply crop the image to my desired size. There we go. So fairly straightforward. Another thing I want to show you that I'll probably show you when I actually get to this main image. Okay, but for right now, here's our simple image. I'm going to place some text, and this text is going to be, let's say, just types of cars. Vintage. Make this bigger, or let's say 36 is good. And once I have one of them, remember, I can create a component off of this and copy it. So if I change text on one of the texts, it's going to change for all of the boxes. Okay, so let me in fact make it a little bit more smaller here. So instead of 36, I'm going to use 24. There we go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this a component, right? Go to create component, and once it is created, I'm going to hold the Alt key down and just copy it, and then copy it again, and maybe do another one. Okay, so I'm going to have 4 of these, and then of course I'm going to highlight all of them and create a group. And we talked about groups, right? So it's easier for you to actually work with them. So I'm going to right click, and then I'm going to choose group selection. You can do Control G as well. So that way I've grouped all of these. So if I need to change the text, maybe I could. So instead of vintage, I'm going to call this classic, and I'm going to change the text here as well. And this is going to be modern cars, and this is going to be old cars. Just some random text here. Okay, so here's my vintage, here's my classic, here's the modern, and here's the old. On the right side of the screen, I'm maybe going to add maybe a newsletter or a search area or a menu item, something like that. Okay, so let's go ahead and create those. Maybe I'll just add some social media here. That looks good on top. So let's find our icons here, Another shortcut here is that you can select multiple icons using the control key on the keyboard. So for instance, I'm going to select the Facebook icon, hold the control key down, select the Insta, and then the Twitter and YouTube, all 4 of them. Open, and notice Figma understands that there are 4 icons or images that need to be placed on the artboard. So I'm going to go ahead and place them one by one, 2, 3, and 4. So 4 clicks, it places the images accordingly. I can separate these images, make them smaller. And of course, if I need to maintain the proportion, remember I need to hold the Shift key down. So this is my first, and this is going to be my second image, and my third image, and there's going to be one more, of course, my 4th image. So this is need to be for the same size, right? So I need to make sure that they all remain the same size. So let's say I want to keep 60 by 60, right? So I need to make sure that this also of the same size, and of course the same size for the Facebook icon as well. Okay, perfect. Let's align them together and make it bigger so we can actually see. It's easier for you to see as well. So I have a margin of 11, 11, and then 11. Perfect. Highlight them all. Make sure you group them. Working with groups is simpler because remember when we talked earlier in one of the earlier lectures, you may have hundreds and hundreds of these layers and things can get easily out of hands. So it's always better to group them. So group 2 is my social icons. And then this group right here, I'm going to call this top text. So our design is looking good. Scroll down. Next, I'm going to add some image, some banner image here, a large image, place image. And I'm going to choose one of the vintage cars here. Let's see if I can find one. Okay. That's the hard part. There we go. I'm going to choose this one. So simply select this, click open, and you should be able to place this image right on the artboard. And of course, it's a large image, right? So I can make it smaller, or let me first make it smaller. So let's say 1000 by 1000, and I'm going to put 0 so it fits into the artboard. Perfect. So I'm going to work with this image, make it a little nicer, maybe place right here so everything is aligned to the last icon, right? And of course, the easiest way is for me to turn on the grid. So before I work further with this image, I'm going to navigate to my actual frame and bring up a grid. And this is just for you guys, so you can actually see when you're starting off. But once you get experience, you would understand where to place the objects. So our columns are going to be, I'm going to work on a 12 column with a gutter of 20, and the same thing, 12 rows with a gutter of 20. Okay. So you can actually see the layout. Let me make this a little lighter. There we go. Perfect. Okay. So now it's easier for us to work with, right? So I'm going to choose, let me bring up the column grids here. So we move this group here and snap to the grid. Same thing with our image here. Now I can customize this image right in Figma. So I don't have to go back to Photoshop or some other tool to customize the image. I can pretty much do a lot of things. It's pretty powerful features in Figma. So I'm going to bring up my image here. And of course I can work with exposure, contrast, saturation. But what if I want to blur this image, or let's say make it lighter, right? So it doesn't show up as crisp as it looks now. So in order to do that, I need to work with layers. So right now the layer is passed through. So in order for me to blur the image or lighten the image, I'm going to use the multiply layer, and instead of 100%, I'm going to say 50%, and notice it lightens up the image, and that's exactly what I need. And I'm going to make this image a little larger here because I'm going to place some text on the left. Same thing, I'm going to snap the logo to the grid. There we go. All right, perfect. So I have the image. Next I want some text. So I'm going to go ahead and enter some text here, and just some random text. So the best car to drive is vintage. Of course, highlight the text, make it bigger, I can now also customize this text box. Okay, and let me show you how it's done. But first, let me enter a rectangle here, because I'm going to customize, bring this forward or bring this to front, change some color. All right, perfect. And again, you can play with this, right? So the idea is so that you understand and see how it snaps to the grid lines and how our blog or the website is kind of all in order, right? And once you group those and then you add constraints, so it becomes a responsive design as well. So the best car to drive is vintage. Let me go ahead and, in fact, I want to keep these edges straight. All right, next I'm going to highlight the actual rectangle box, and the fill color I'm going to change it to the eyedropper and make sure I use the same color as our logo. Okay, so it matches the actual theme as well, and this is good practice, by the way. So I have my image here. I'm going to make this bigger, add another button here, and that's going to say find out more. And this I'm going to fill with the other color of the logo, add some text. I can say click here, make the font smaller. Let's zoom in so you can actually see what's going on. It's much easier to work when you're zoomed in. And let's center this, make this box a little smaller. There we go. Give this button a nice shape. Make some round edges, or just leave it as it is because everything is rectangular, right? So I'm not doing any round edges at this point in time. All right, perfect. So once I have a button created, let's add some more text. Change the text rather. Let's say find out more. And of course, center this. Looks better. And I'm going to set some constraints to this. Same thing. Add some constraints. Because once you set these constraints, it becomes responsive, right? So if you make the actual frame size smaller or larger, all the items adjust. So I'm going to group these as well. So I'm going to select the text, the frame, all of these 4 items, and create a group. And I'm going to call this main text. All right, great. So let's zoom out a bit. There we go. Next, I'm going to put maybe a date here on top, or read more on the bottom. And of course, you can add some more text. And let's say it's April. Zoom in again. There we go. And I'm going to make sure it's centered or aligned left. And then I can also adjust the top bottom as well. And it's a good idea to do with all of these, right? So as you're working with them, you can center them, you can align left, center, it depends. So I have it as align left, or you can center this to the actual frame behind it as well. So this is another tool when you actually work with text. You can actually use automatic adjustments. Same thing here. I'm going to center it, align it. All right, so let's zoom out here. So once I have these, I'm going to group them, right? So I'm going to hold the shift key down and select the entire group, or I can simply highlight that way as well. So either way, on your left navigation pane, you have the ability to highlight all of them. And then I'm going to create a group. I'm going to call this banner group. Perfect. And of course, once I have the group, I need to also ensure that this image of the car is also left and right, and then left and right for the entire group as well. Okay, perfect. Maybe I'll do a bottom here as well, top and bottom, so it snaps. Okay, this looks good. On the bottom here, I'm going to create some additional rectangles. Now I'm going to place some images of the cars, right? So let's zoom in so you can actually see. I'm going to insert an image within this box. Just some random images here. Perfect. Let's create a component. Alt key down. Just copy it. Snap to the gutter line here, or the left of this column. Maybe do another one. I'm going to continue to do this, and then of course I can align them based on my grid. So this is going to go to the far right, and this one to the far left. And then of course my rest of the spacing goes in between. And that's how the grid lines help, by the way, right? So as you're working with these images, you should have the ability to select them all, group them. I'm going to call this small cars. And next I can simply center them, make them a little larger, hold the shift key down, right? So they snap, so they remain proportionate. Okay, there we go. All right, so our blog, a simple page, is coming right along nicely. I'm going to add some text here. I'm going to say featured, make the text smaller. And of course, I can create a button as well. I can copy the top one, or I can create a new button as well. I can always use icon sets from the internet. You can go to materials.io, or you can use Google icon sets and whatnot to actually create these images. The purpose here is to show you the actual tools and how to work with constraints and layers and text so that you get comfortable with the grid lines and the actual fundamentals of Figma design. But as far as the stock images and the social media icons are concerned, of course, the sky is the limit. You can design your own theme that way. So once I have the featured cars, I'm going to go ahead and simply replace some of these images, add some more cars. That's one way to do it. Let me show you the other way. So once you highlight and do this, so you double click on this object, it brings up the image, choose image from here. So both ways are correct. So instead of crop, let's say fit or fill, and then choose the image. Let's select the other car, and it's going to place the other car in this. Similarly, I can navigate to the next one, choose image, and how about this car? Notice how it's actually cropping automatically, right? So that's a good thing about Figma design. You don't have to worry about the image resizing. Let me go ahead to the next one. And likewise, I'm going to do it for the rest of these two images of cars as well. One more to go. I'm going to go ahead. The last image here, click choose image. And then let's see. One last image right here. Although this blog is about vintage cars, right? But I have this new latest design car. Maybe I want to change it to display a vintage. There we go. Perfect. So we have our featured cars. We have all of these images placed, and of course our groups are good. And if I collapse these groups, I'll have the small cars, the banner group, and so on. So that way things remain organized. So let me select the desktop and then remove these grid lines for now so you can actually see what the page looks like. Of course, I can have the page background, or I can color the background of this page. I'm going to use the eyedropper and maybe choose this color, or you can choose any other color, or even the image itself as well. So it just depends on which background you choose to use. So let's keep it white for now. So once you have this blog, of course, you can add a footer line here, or add some more areas on your blog. You can make this smaller or larger, but you get the idea. So that way you can design your own elements. If I like to place maybe another tool here, maybe a border, I could do so. That kind of separates, right? And I can create a component off of this. Zoom in a little bit so it's easier. So that's 1440 by 10. Maybe you want to do 1440 by 5. And then since this is a component, I'm going to hold the Alt key down, zoom in a little bit more. There we go. And then of course highlight all of them and then group them. I'm going to call these 3 lines. And of course take this entire group, call 3 lines, and make sure I set these constraints. I'm going to change the color. Let's zoom out, fix up my 2 lines on top. There we go. All right. So you get the idea, right? Of course, you can create some more icons. You can insert more icons and create your own blog. Let me work with this image, this rectangle here. I like to actually put a layer here. Same thing, multiply. Maybe you want to do this 80%, or how about 75? There we go. Perfect. So once you have this blog created, right? Next, you can give this blog to your developers. How do they actually know what to code? It's easier. Notice the code tab on the right side of the screen. So let me select my frame. And then any object that you select on your blog or website, for example, if I were to select this image, it will display the CSS code for me, or it's going to show me the code. So once I select this image, it gives me the CSS code of 500 pixels by 224, the width, the height, the constraints, the opacity, and so on. So for developers, it's easier to actually take a look at these. They can, most times they'll copy these and use them in their code editor, whether they're using Atom or Sublime or any Eclipse for development purposes. But that's up to the developers, right? So all you would do is just give them, hand over this, or in fact invite them. You can share this, send this link to your developer. They can come in here, take a look at each of these CSS code. Similarly, if I were to select this group, notice it gives me the CSS properties for this. Notice in addition to the table format, I can have the code. So if I click on code, it will give me the actual CSS code that the developer can look at, the width, the height, the left, and the top for this group. Similarly for each of these, right? So all I need to do is just give my developers this particular layout. I just demonstrated in this simple project, but the idea, the goal here for you guys is to understand and kind of take a look at all of the different tools that I've used. And if I've missed certain tools, make sure you assign yourself your homework, right? So kind of work with them, because I did not add too much detail into going into maybe components or constraints, because I wanted to demonstrate most of these areas in this one lecture. But at your end, when you're actually designing, you need to spend some time, okay? And that's the best way to learn. So go ahead, practice, create your first website or a blog. Maybe add another footer area here on the bottom, and let this be your homework. So as a homework, just go ahead and add a footer area, maybe add some icons, some copyright text, and so on. So I hope this helps. Practice, and let's move to the next lesson. Welcome back. Super excited. In this lesson, I'm going to demonstrate how to go about creating a splash screen. So this is another project that we're going to do. We're going to start from scratch. We'll first create a splash screen, and then I'm going to also demonstrate some additional screens as well. So in this particular lecture, just focusing on how to go about creating a splash screen. Fairly straightforward, but I'll give you a good idea once you actually start to design it, and I would like you to practice and have your creativity flow. So let's jump right in. I'm going to go ahead and click on the frame tool, and I'm going to click on, let's say, the iPhone 8, which is 375 by 667 pixels. So I'm going to click on this. It brings up an empty frame for me on the canvas, and here's my artboard. Now a couple of ways I could do it. Of course, we've been doing it by importing images and so on. I could also use existing kits, right? So I could have like Messenger Platform Kit. I have the Material Design UI kit. You can get these from figmaresources.com. I've also created a lecture towards the end of the course you can take a look at. They'll give you several resources. I've also provided you with the zip file, so you can download all of these, okay? So not to worry. But let's explore what those are, and then we'll come back to our frame itself here, the blank canvas. So I'm going to go to, let's take a look at the material design. And notice here, you can see several pre-made cards, for instance. You'll have buttons here that you can simply pick and choose and copy and paste on your own canvas area. So which is super helpful, unless you're really customizing for your own needs. You can of course still customize it. For instance, if I need to change the color of this button, right? So let's say if I pick this button here, so I'm going to select this, just do a copy, and notice on the left side it gives me the actual layer that I'm selecting. So if I just wish to select the button, I'm just going to do a Control-C, copy, go back to my canvas, and just place it onto my blank area. So this is great, right? Because now I can actually move and drag and change the colors and whatnot on my canvas itself, so I don't have to draw it manually, create a plus sign. I have a 56 by 56 button already, and notice all of the properties, all the layers are part of this. So here, if I expand the actions frame here, notice each icon is different, right? So the plus sign is placed differently, and then of course I have my circle as well, and of course my color. So it saves you a lot of time when you're actually working with projects, or you're designing an app for your clients, or if you're doing some freelance work. This is a great way to actually go about doing it. All right, so let's minimize this. So I have a button here. Similarly, let's go back. You can actually take a look at other resources, and there are thousands and thousands of them. It just depends on what you're really looking to do. So I'm going to pick this button here as well, or of course you can create your own buttons as well. And of course, once you have it, you can customize it. You can make it bigger or smaller. It just depends on your own requirement. Perfect. So you get the idea, right? Similarly, if I go to the messenger platform design, notice I have the entire frame designs even available. So I can pick this entire frame and then copy it and then start building on it. So it's much easier that way. And I'm going to demonstrate that in the next screen as well. Or in fact, let me just do that right now. So just copy this and then paste it. And notice this is the same size as the iOS or iPhone 8 because it's 375 by 667 pixels. Let me make it bigger so you can see. There we go. And the same thing for my actual frame that I created earlier on is also the 375 by 667. So these are actually both the same. Perfect. So you get the idea. So I'm going to get rid of this for now because what I'm looking for is just creating a splash screen, right? So I'm going to demonstrate in this lesson just the splash screen, and then we'll take a look at how to customize our rest of the areas as well. So let's continue. Let's go ahead and give our frame a background for my splash screen. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the shapes tool and bring up my place image. And this will open up the Windows Explorer and allows me to actually import any image that I choose to. And again, I've provided all of these images you can take a look at. So I'm going to go ahead and select one of these images. And for a splash screen, let's go ahead and pick this image here. And we've done this before, but I just want to make sure that we understand when you're actually working on a certain project here, right, from scratch, you need to first understand or select these images or objects that you want to place on the canvas. The one thing that I'm not showing here, again, I reiterate, and I've said this in my previous lectures, is that you need to first design everything on paper, right? So you need to know exactly what you need, where you need it, and how you're going to go about actually placing it. So that's important that you actually have the actual design or the creativity on a piece of paper, so it helps. So you don't have to create this on the fly. Of course, when you get some experience or you get used to this, you can start to create these. So I'm going to bring this to front, our button here. I'm going to get rid of this plus sign. I don't need this on the flash screen. And I'm going to go ahead and make it bigger so you can actually see. All right, good. So this is where I'm going to place the button. And I also need maybe one more thing on here, which is the logo, or could be any image. I'm going to go ahead and, in fact, select a logo. How about this one? And let's go ahead and minimize this or just make it smaller. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually crop this image. So just bring up my image, and we've done this before. So I'm going to crop this image, and I'll just like this top part of the logo being displayed. And I'm going to hold my shift key to make sure I maintain the same proportions. All right, perfect. I can make this in the center or on top, just depending. I'm going to keep this in the center here and move the button a little further down. And notice I don't have the grid lines, right? So just a quick test, quick quiz. How do you go about actually bringing the grid lines? Do you know how? Of course. So let's click on the frame here. And I'm going to bring up my grid lines. Here's my layout grid. I'm going to demonstrate show columns, right? So it depends on the number of columns you want. Remember, Bootstrap has a max of 12 columns, so on. So you can actually, before you design, you need to understand that you need to have these columns so you can center your buttons and whatnot, right? So here, based on the grid lines, my button is centered, and of course my logo is also centered. Perfect. So let me hide these grid lines. So just quickly one or two show you. There we go. So the image is back, and notice I have a small logo. I cropped this image, and I also have a button here, and this is going to be my splash screen. That's the first screen that the user is going to see when the actual app loads. And of course, once I have the image, I can bring up the image. I can work with additional properties like fit, crop, tile, or I can work with exposure, contrast, and so on. I can also make this layer multiply. So I want to have this maybe at 50%, and same thing with this image. I'm going to make this 50% as well. So it kind of blends into the actual design. So let me make this bigger. All right. So I'm going to set some constraints so that this particular logo moves along with the screen, right? So I need to make sure that it's left and right. And same thing with the button. It's already left and right, which is fine. Perfect. Great. So next, of course, I can do some additional tweaks to my image. For example, instead of crop, I can do a fill, or I can do a fit, for instance, or crop, or tile, right? So again, it depends on my own requirement as to what it is that I like to do. And I'm going to keep this for now. I think it's looking good for the splash screen. And for the button, I'm just going to go ahead and change the text here. So I'm going to say getting started, or I can say click here, or you can say begin your journey, or whatever it is that you like to actually let the user know when the actual app loads. So this is our simple splash screen. You can make it bigger. You can change the color of the button as well. You can give the button a round shape. So if you're not comfortable with this, you can of course play with the angles or rotation. So once I have the splash screen, next I'm going to go ahead and actually create our first screen. So once the app loads, then I'm going to go ahead and create the second screen. So practice with this, fairly straightforward, and then let's move to the next lesson. Welcome back. Moving forward in this lecture, I'm going to demonstrate how to go about creating the next screen. In the previous lecture, we created the splash screen, which you see right here. Here, moving forward with this particular project, we are designing an iPhone 8 app design. So notice it's iPhone 8, and then the size of the actual frame is 375 by 667. So we're making use of our existing material design kits or messenger platform kit or any other design kit that you can actually get, and I've stored them in the resources area. You can download the zip file. Of course, there are other websites like figmaresources.com. You can actually go and bring those kits directly into Figma as well. All right, so moving forward, after the splash screen, I like the next screen build. Of course, I can build it from scratch, right? I can go to frame and then insert another one. The easiest way, like I mentioned earlier, just go to your design kits, for example, and I'm just going to go to the Messenger platform design kit, and this is what I'm looking for. So I'm going to go ahead and in fact select this extension container, which is the entire container size, and make sure you have the same size so you're not actually bringing in a container of different size. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this, go back to my splash file here, and then simply paste it, and it pastes the entire container. I can now pick and choose which one of these I like to make part of my particular app design. So I'm going to go ahead and simply choose this one right here, which is the iOS container. So I'm going to copy this and paste this, bring it away from my canvas, and I'm going to get rid of this. Perfect. So I have this container root here. Make sure I've selected the entire container root before I move it. There we go. So notice it is the same size, right? So it's 375 by 667, whereas my iPhone 8 is also the same size. So this is going to be our next screen, and this is helpful. I'll make this bigger. Notice I already get all of these icons, right? So for instance, I have the status bar, I have the back button, I have the identity, I have the phone, even the video you can play. So all of these icons are already placed within my frame. If I bring up my layout grid, for instance, for the iOS container root, so click on the plus sign, the grid is 10 pixels, and here are my columns, right? And then my rows. So notice this is by default the 5 columns or rows. So if I increase this to, let's say, 7, it kind of gives me a nice idea. So I can this way increase or decrease the actual status bar or the menu bar. Perfect. So let me get rid of these layout grid here. Okay, so once you have the design, notice you can actually change whatever it is that you would like to change. If I need to change the fill color, I could do so. Maybe you want to have this light blue or other blues. So it just depends on your own requirement. Now you can play around with this. And as a homework, as a task, go ahead, make some changes to the actual layout. Maybe you want to move the phone button next to the video or the video button first, and so on. So once I have the title screen here, next I can insert additional cards as well. Since my app design is related to cars, similar to the previous projects that we've been doing, I'm going to go ahead and insert some cards here. Okay, or maybe first insert, let's say, an image. So simply click on the place image, and then this is going to bring us the image here, and I'm going to pick and choose any one of these images, right? So let's say I want to insert this image here. There we go. Okay, so once I have the next screen, I'm just going to say a welcome here. So I'm just going to create some text. I'm going to say welcome to vintage cars. I'm going to highlight the text, make it a little larger. Maybe I want to do a 24 font. Okay, let me go ahead and crop this image and fix up this image here. Perfect. Now the image is in fact within my own screen, and that's exactly what I did. I kind of filled this image so that it fits the entire iOS screen. Okay, so I'm going to say welcome to vintage cars. Maybe decrease the font size so it kind of, and it's good practice not to overlay the fonts on the images. So you want to make sure that you're actually using this as a good practice. There we go. Make it smaller. All right, so this is going to be a next screen, right, from here on out. So next, I'm going to just make or copy this screen. So I have this entire container root selected, and just use the Alt key and just copy it again. So this is what essentially is using the Alt key and copying the entire frame, including the nav bar, the menu bar, the status bars together. So once I have this, I'm going to go ahead and in fact remove this image, and let's see, Next, I want to insert, go back to my material kit design. I want to find some cards here. And what I'm looking for are image cards, right? So I can actually place certain images onto my next screen. Okay, smaller again. There we go. So I'm going to pick any one of these cards, which is helpful because I don't have to draw the entire card. I can simply select one of them, just copy it, go back to my splash screen, and then paste it. And notice it kind of pastes the card right here. So each screen is going to display maybe a car image within the card title. I can copy it again, or in fact, instead of copying it, I'm going to use make this a component, right? So bring this card out and use the Alt key and create a couple of cards. Maybe I want to use 4 cards. So next, I'm going to go ahead and place these cards onto the screen here. And again, you can design your own way, the way you want it. I'm just going to display 4 cards on the next screen. And then each of these cards are aligned properly. I can give it a card title here, and then of course an image as well. So go back to my image tool, bring up the image, and just pick any one of these cards, and it is going to place the image within the card itself. And notice it fills the rest of the cards because I used the Alt key and copied it, right? So it actually created a component. So anything changes to the first changes to the rest of them. So now make this bigger so you can actually see. I've placed 4 cards onto my screen number 2. So that way you can kind of continue to design your app and move forward. I can say maybe on my title screen here, or on the second screen, welcome to vintage cars, click here to get started. I can place a button. So let me go ahead and quickly find a button here. Maybe I want to use this round button. Go back to my splash screen and then simply change the fill color, use the eyedropper. That looks good. And I want to change the button size to maybe 150. Maybe I'll do 100. There we go. And I want to get rid of this, of course. Perfect. So that way you can kind of continue on and design your own app, right? So of course I can place some text here. I can say click here, make sure my text is centered, change the font of the text to white. There we go, looking nice. So now once the user clicks on this button here, it's going to take the user to the next screen, which is going to display 4 different cards, and that way you can continue on building your app. So as homework, go ahead, create a splash screen, which we did in the first section here. Then we created our next app design screen, and then of course our cards placement as well. And of course, here's my card title. So if I change the title to, let's say vintage, notice the rest of the cards change as well, which is kind of nice working with components, right? And using the Alt key to copy. And we've done this before. So very powerful tool. So I hope this helps. Practice, and let's move to the next lesson. Welcome back. Moving forward in this lecture, it's going to be a brief lecture, but I'm going to demonstrate how to in fact tweak your design, right? So once you have the entire design made, you want to make sure that everything is in perfect order. In other words, the dimensions of the card, it is aligned properly with the frame, and it's much easier to do editing, maybe use some change of colors or change of images when you're actually zoomed in and working with the layers as well. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time in demonstrating a few additional tips and techniques so that as you become proficient with app design, this is very helpful. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in to my design here. I'm just going to pick a card, and notice the entire design is, as I hover over each one of these, notice on the layers it kind of tells me which layer I'm on. Okay, so for instance, if I were to click on this layer called scrim, it highlights something, right? But I really do not know exactly what is being highlighted. Next to the scrim, there's an eye tool, or looks like an icon that looks like an eye. So if I click on this particular area, notice it removes that layer. So now I can keep clicking and clicking, and I'll be able to actually see what this scrim layer actually is overlaying on. Okay, so this kind of gives you an idea. So this is my scrim layer, which is the background layer. So once I simply change the color, because I'm going to keep this color for instance now as an example, and I scroll to the left, same thing here, it goes to my next iOS container root. Let me expand that, find the scrim here, make sure that it is the same type, and now my app is kind of looking similar to this particular area. If I want to change the color of this fill here, I could do so, change the eyedropper, and it kind of changes the color. Or if I want a solid background, I could use that as well. So again, it depends. I'm going to undo this, as to your own requirement. So once you've changed the actual background here, you can next also take a look at whether the cards are aligned properly or not. So as I hover over these cards and click on or hold the Alt key down without clicking, just hold the Alt key down, notice it gives me the actual sizes as well. So it's going to give me 40 pixels is the distance between these two cards, and the 44 pixel difference is between the title and the top of the card. Similarly, I can go here and shows me that it's 40 pixels as I hover over each one of these. So that kind of helps me identify whether my cards are aligned equally on the card itself. And if I select the card and go on the right side on the code, notice it gives me the CSS code as well. Or I can take a look at the actual code. It gives me the positioning from the top is 9.6%, which is relative, or position is absolute. So similarly, if I click on this particular card, notice it gives me the code. So the developers can actually make good use of these particular areas where they don't have to worry about the actual design and what percentage to have, or they come back to you and say, hey designer, what do I do? What is the distance, or what is the positioning from top to bottom? So that way they can just simply pick this code right from here. And the good thing is that once you share, for example, this particular app design with the developer, you can just simply click on the share button and it'll bring up the share splash screen. You can simply invite someone and they can either edit or they can simply view as well. You can also send a link by creating a link. So it's a very useful and a powerful element in Figma where you can actually have the developers come in and edit or view your actual design and pick up the code from here. They can copy the code and use it in their development. So in this short brief lesson, I just wanted to make sure the benefit of actually zooming in and working with each of these layers. So this way I can actually take a look at, for instance, the home button. If I just want to work with the home button and look at the sizes, so notice you'll see that it's 27.5 pixels from the left side, 32.5 on the top, and 11.5 on the bottom. And of course I get the CSS code on the right side. So the common practice in my experience is you want to be able to know the color, right? So it's number sign 0084F and F, and that way the developer will know exactly which color to use when he or she is actually developing the code behind the home button. So a very useful tool when you're actually zoomed in, kind of allows you to see each one of these, and as you hover over each one of these buttons, you'll notice it shows you the actual details of the layer itself. So I hope this helps. Practice zooming in, working with a little bit more of greater detail so you get more proficient. With this, let's move to the next lesson. Welcome back. Moving right along, in this lecture I'm going to demonstrate how the concept of prototyping works. So once, for instance, you have your app design completed, right? Notice on the right side, there is a tab next to the design tab called prototype. What this means is simply that once you have the app design completed, you can actually view it or preview it from one screen to the other screen, or from one object to the other object, by linking them together. So let me in fact demonstrate. Let me make this smaller here first. Okay, so in this app, right now we have about 3 designs or 3 screens. What I'm going to do is, first let me collapse all of these so you could actually see. So I have the first screen. If I click on the first iOS container root, and then I have the next middle one, and then I have the iPhone 8, which is my splash screen. So let me first organize this. So I'm going to drag and make my iPhone 8 as my first group. And then I'm going to take this iOS container root and shift it to the middle so it works. I can also rename it, so I can call it 1, and the other one I can call it 2. So that way it's easier for me to identify, right? So again, I've talked about this in previous lectures, how you can organize it. So I'm going to move this exactly 48 pixels apart. Perfect. So this is how the prototyping works. So once I select my frame, for example, any one of these, right? Make it a little bigger so you can actually see. So this is my first screen. I'm going to select it, go to my prototype. As soon as I navigate to the prototype tab, notice there's something called the destination. And right now it's none, right? Because all I've done is selected my first screen. But what's different about this is you will notice a small circle displayed. And this allows you to connect 2 screens together. So I can simply hover over the circle, small dot, and then simply drag it and connect it to the next screen. I can drag wherever I want, right, to this screen, which is the 3rd screen, right? But obviously I want to go step by step. So I want to first drag and let go, and this will transition to the middle screen, which is iOS container root, and automatically it shows me in the destination. Same thing, if I were to navigate to my iOS container root 1, I will see a small circle, simply connect to the destination as being iOS container root 2. And the behavior, it can be instant, or I could dissolve, which is fine. And same thing, I can select this, and this I could say maybe dissolve as well. So now essentially what I've done is I've created transitions, right, among all of my 3 different screens. Let's go ahead and preview and see what it looks like. So if I would like to present this prototype, I could do so. So click on the present up on the menu bar, and this will navigate to a new screen, which will allow you to actually see just that splash screen itself, the first screen, and then of course as I click on that, it'll take me to the next screen and so on. So you get the idea. The same thing can be accomplished, by the way, in InVision. So as a separate app or separate website, you can go to envision.com and kind of check that out, see what that looks like. That allows you to do the same thing, do transitioning from one object to the other or one screen to the other, and has much more rich features. But for our purpose in Figma, we'll stick to our presentation here. Perfect. So notice it shows me the first screen only. At this point I have 1 of 3, right, because I only have 3 screens. If in your projects that you're working for a client, you may have tens or hundreds of these screens, right, because you're actually designing the full app from start to finish. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the first one. It's going to take me to the next one, next, and so on. So as I click on each one of these, is going to take me from one screen to the other. So that way you can actually also present by connecting or using the prototyping as well. that allows you, it's a good feature by the way, that allows you to actually see the transitioning of your app from one screen to the other, and this is good for the UI or the user experience as well. So practice with this. I hope this helps, and let's move to the next lesson. Welcome back. Super excited. We're going to move forward, and in this lecture I'm going to demonstrate how to export your layers. So, or in fact export in general, right? So if you have maybe 3 screens or 10 screens, you can start to export as PNG images, JPEG, and SVG. So let's go ahead and jump right in. I'm going to go ahead and first navigate to my design tab on the right side, and notice on the bottom here, on the last sections here, it says export, and I can click on the plus sign next to export, and that determines what I would like to export. I could select a screen first. For example, if I select the iPhone 8 frame first, scroll down to the export, I have the ability to export as twice the size, 1.5 times, 3, 4, and so on, or the actual width or the height as well. So I'm going to say twice the size, and as PNG, JPEG, or SVG, I'm going to keep selecting or have PNG, and then I can click on export iPhone 8, which is actually this particular splash screen. I could export multiple screens, so hold down the control key on the keyboard and select all of the screens. On the bottom, notice now it says export 3 layers. I can take a look at the preview as well, and can show me the preview of all of these 3 mini screens. So if I click on export 3 layers, it simply brings up the Windows Explorer for me, and I can create a new folder here quickly. I'm going to call it My Export, and then click Save, and this is going to export the 3 layers as PNG format, and this has successfully exported in PNG format all of my 3 layers. Similarly, I could actually just highlight any one of these and export just this particular iOS nav 1:1 area, right? Or just the back button, for example, or the home button, and so on. So it depends on what exactly it is that I like to export. So for instance, if I like to export just this container, iOS container 2, the entire container, or maybe just this particular card of the vintage car. So I would just select this part, click on export, and it shows me the preview that this is the only card that is going to be exported. Click on export, and then it defaults the name as category. I can change the name if I choose to, and click save. Before I click save, notice my previous export that I did for all the 3 layers, 3 screens are here. And then click save, and this should save the card as well. And this is helpful because I could then use these images, give it to my developers, or place them on my web server as I'm developing the app or the blog or website. So I quickly wanted to demonstrate the wonderful feature of Figma, that is the export. So I hope this helps practice, and let's move to the next lesson. Welcome back. In this lecture, an important one, I'm going to demonstrate the Boolean operations in Figma. What this means is, let's say you have multiple shapes, right? So you have 2 circles or 2 different shapes or layers. And what you can do is with those layers, you can do several kind of operations with them. So you could do subtract, you could do union, you could do intersection, and so on. So let me show you what I really mean so it kind of makes sense as I give you an example. So let's say we have these 2 layers, right? 2 of these cars, and I want to overlap these layers and then apply certain Boolean parameters. But before I actually start working with these shapes, let me give you a simpler example. So I'm going to go ahead and create a frame, same size, and I'm going to quickly draw maybe a rectangle or some ellipse tool. So hold the shift key down right to make sure it's a perfect circle. So I'm going to say maybe it's 172 by 172, and then I'm going to copy it and then create another circle. Okay, so I have these two shapes of equal size. So once I have these two circles of the same size, for instance, notice on the top here, it gives me the options, right? Such as the union selection, the subtract, intersection, and exclude selection. And the reason why they're grayed out because I've not selected each of these layers, okay? So let me go ahead and first overlap partially these two circles so you can actually see. Make it a little bigger. Perfect. It's better. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and hold the Shift key down on my keyboard since I'm using Windows. And again, if you're a Mac user, I've included several shortcuts for Mac users in the resource section, even though this entire course has been designed and taught using Windows. So if you're a Mac user, just kind of go along and take a look at the shortcuts in your Command and Control keys on your Mac so that you're able to follow along. So once I've selected these two objects here, if I click on the drop down arrow, notice I have these four options now available to me, which is the union selection, subtract, intersection, and exclude. First, once you have these two objects selected, let me go ahead and click on union, and what this will do is will merge these two different shapes together. So if I click on union, notice now I have these two shapes. Similarly, if I do subtract, it's going to subtract the top layer, the right side of the layer, from the first one. Similarly, if I were to do an intersection, it would only give me the center intersection where both of these layers or objects meet or overlap. And with exclude, it's going to exclude the middle part. And then flatten out selection means it's just going to flatten out the entire layer itself. So this is very powerful, especially when you're actually designing certain shapes or images and you want to overlap these images. So let's take a step further. Let me go ahead and if I click, notice on these three shapes here 3 times, it gives me the availability to actually manipulate the shape the way I want to. And this again brings, it actually makes a vector, right? So I can work with my vector design based on my own requirement. So if I need to overlap, let's say this side, just like an overlay, right? When you're turning the page, let me go ahead and give it some color. There we go. And same thing, I can do it for this side as well, or any side. So again, it depends on the shape that you wish to create and use. So let me go ahead and select the shape, flatten the selection, and now I have this image. Perfect. So that way you can kind of practice and take a look at different Boolean operations in Figma. And once, of course, I have this, I can make it smaller. And then I can take this shape and place it anywhere on the other screens. So that way, once you're designing, you can actually work with this. Perfect. Get rid of this. That was just an example to show you. So in this instance, you can of course change the color here and do all sorts of things, right? Instead of solid, you can have linear or radial, angular, diamond, and so on. So it just depends on your own requirement. So now our app is looking even better, right? So just wanted to demonstrate the Boolean operations and working with vector shapes. Very powerful. So based on your own project or the requirement from the client, you could continue to create different shapes and use these Boolean operations. So I hope this helps. Practice with it. Let's move to the next lecture. Welcome back. Another important lesson I'm going to demonstrate in this lecture, the concept of masking images, okay, or masking objects. Very important and handy. A little bit of intermediate stuff here, but I think it's important that you not only understand fundamentally the entire Figma concept and the various tools and how to create an effective design, but also learn some additional techniques, and you can practice on that. So I'm not going to divulge too much into it, but at least I'm going to give you the starting point, okay, of how masking works, similar to how I provided you in the previous lecture, the concept of merging images together, like creating a union, intersection, or selection, and so on. So let me go ahead and jump right in. So I'm going to first create a new frame so it's easy for you to actually see. Here's my iPhone 8 frame that I'm using. I'm going to insert a couple of objects here. First, let's go ahead and do an ellipse tool. So hold the shift key down. I'm going to create that. And next I'm going to also insert an image so you could actually see how masking works. So place an image, and let's say I'm going to choose this logo here. Perfect. So now I have these two objects, right, or layers on my artboard. Notice at this point, if I take one of these layers, it just kind of goes behind and I can bring it to front and whatnot. And we've been doing that, right? What if I want to take this entire image and then kind of crop it down so that it fits the circle? So it's not a square anymore. And I can simply mask it so I'm only able to see the top part of the logo, not the text. I'm not interested in the text. I'm just want to mask the top part. How do I do it? Okay, very important and handy, again, as you work with your app design and work with different images. This is extremely useful and helpful as well. All right, so to do masking, I need to first select the actual object, not the image, but the actual object that I want to mask to. So for instance, if it's an ellipse or a rectangle or any polygon shape, it's going to take up that shape. Notice as soon as I select this particular shape, on the top menu in the center is use as a mask. The shortcut is Control, Alt, and M. So if I click on use as mask, notice on the left side on the layers pane, now it says ellipse, and then the blog e-discovery is the image. So both of them are part of this mini group. So once I have this ellipse, which is in fact a mask, and notice an arrow pointing upward, right? So in other words, it's going to mask this particular blog e-discovery. Next, if I select the image itself and simply drag it, and voila, we have a nice mask. If I drag more, obviously the text is also going to show up, right? So within this particular circle, I can mask the image any which way I choose to do so. So here I'm just going to mask this image right here, and I have a masked image. So this is a good way you can mask images. Similarly, you can go ahead and practice with, let's say, an image of a car you want to mask, or maybe draw another shape that you wish to mask. So for instance, let me demonstrate another one. So here I have this image. I'm going to delete this image and I'm going to use maybe another shape, right? So how about this star tool? So it doesn't matter which shape you have, as long as you have it masked. Notice, select the shape first, use as a mask. And in this instance, notice you don't see an arrow, right? So if I select my image here, it's standalone, right? So if I drag this image now, it doesn't really mask it, right? Because I don't have the image inside the actual masked shape. Very important, because you're going to get stuck otherwise not masking, right? Why is it not masking? Is because you do not have the arrow and you do not have the actual image inside the mask. What I mean is simply drag this image inside the mask. So now, if I were to simply move it up, notice now I get the actual arrow pointing upwards to the image, which means now I have a mask. Okay, so Just as a word of caution, if it's not masking, that means you do not have the actual image that you want to mask inside the actual shape in that mini group. So this arrow kind of tells you exactly that this is going to mask. Perfect. So with this, a kind of helpful practice with different shapes and masking. And I hope this helps. Let's move to the next lesson. Welcome back. In this short lecture, I just want to demonstrate by going to figmaresources.com, wonderful site where you can actually take a look at various resources. For instance, you can download the social media icons. In fact, not really download, but you can actually duplicate into your Figma desktop or online. You can open directly in Figma. You can take a look at the designer profile, source article, or open resources. So again, these are individuals who have shared these freely. You can feel free to download them and take a look at them. Use them within your app or blog or website design. So you have social media icons. You have iOS, for example, GUI interface for iPhone. You have various logos. You have the Facebook Messenger platform design kit, and so on. There's several of them. So an excellent resource. So I just wanted to quickly touch base on where you can go and actually find additional resources. So go ahead, try them out, open them in Figma, and then if you have any questions, let me know. With this, let's move to the next lecture. Welcome back. So we're finally at the course conclusion. In this short lecture, just want to kind of recap the entire idea of what Figma is. What do we do? What do we cover in this course? So we started off with understanding the actual interface of what Figma looks like, the difference between Figma Online and Figma Desktop. This is obviously Figma Desktop. It's real time, so whatever changes you do here are reflected online and vice versa. Then we got into the frame tool and the slice tool and various tools on this menu. Took a look at different shapes, how to create shapes. Obviously, I assigned some homeworks along the way so that hopefully you're practicing with some of these shapes that I did not demonstrate, so you could actually use it, and then of course post any of the questions in the discussion area. We also use the pen tool, the text, comments are fairly straightforward, didn't really show you, but you can actually use it. If you have any questions, just ask. These are comments that you can place for other developers or team members that you're collaborating with. They can actually see the comments that you place for each of these images. So you can simply select, for instance, this particular image on the splash screen, click on the show comments or insert a comment, and kind of gives you the comment box. I can say this logo is great and simply post. So this kind of places a little marker here that shows me that there's a comment regarding this particular object. And of course, I can always reply to this comment and so on. So the entire conversation is being placed in Figma. Okay, so we also talked about other areas such as the center options here, constraints, edit object. Of course, we took a look at the constraints or the components rather. Masking I demonstrated, and also the concept of union selection, and then selecting or masking or taking two different objects and then merging these two objects as union, intersection, and so on. So on the right side of the menu, we talked about the actual presentation. So once you have the screen's app design made, you can present it. So it automatically transitions from one screen to the other. You can share and collaborate your design with other developers and team members. And of course, you can zoom in and hide. We also talked about the right side of the pane, design, prototype, and code tabs pretty extensively in this course. On the left, we took a look at different layers, how to navigate, how to create groups, so it's easier for you to actually work with. And more importantly, the concept of constraints and then components. Each component can have various instances that you can copy across. We also took a look at how to work with different kinds of effects, export, And again, some of these areas are fairly straightforward. I've assigned several homeworks along each of these lectures so you can kind of take a look at and practice. So I hope overall this kind of gave you a sense of Figma, a solid understanding of using Figma as an app design tool. So if you're an entrepreneur, freelancer, or you're working for yourself or your company, your organization, you're designing apps, this is a great tool to use. So with this, I'd like to thank you once again for enrolling in this course, and I look forward to having you in my next set of courses. Thanks again, and have yourself a wonderful day.